We get Outdoors Nation. We all go into the outdoors. We all face adversity in the outdoors, but some people face more adversity than others in the outdoors. And today's guest, well, frankly, she faces a darn sight more adversity in the outdoors than I've ever faced. Today's guest is Nikki Bradley. Nikki, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here
today. And you're in Ulster Island at this point in time.
I am indeed. I'm in Donegal in Ireland, so it's in the south, but it's at the top of Ireland.
It's in the south, but the top. Okay, got it.
Yes, it's in the south, as in the south and north. You know, the way there is the divide in Ireland. Yeah. We're not in Northern Ireland, but we're on the border.
Gotcha. So let's start. I started by speaking about adversity in the outdoors. Let's go and deal with the elephant in the room just to kick this all off. You go mountaineering on crutches. Like, A, I take my hat off to you in respect, but B, how did all that come about?
Yes, I do. I go everywhere on crutches, also up mountains. I walk around my kitchen. I do basically everything on crutches, and have done full time, as I like to call it, for about maybe 8 years. But I've been using them on and off since 2002. So I was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer when I was 16, just turning 17. And that's basically what's led to the situation I'm in now. I had a tumor on the right-hand side of my pelvis for pretty much the full summer. Well, actually, my doctors seemed to think that it was there, possibly there even from birth, and just lay dormant. But it very much made itself known in 2002. So I, had to do the full chemotherapy, radiotherapy. I traveled over to the UK for surgery, and thankfully I've been cancer-free since. So from the cancer point of view, it was very straightforward. If you could recommend a type of, God, this is a terrible thing to say. If you could recommend a type of cancer, I would say Ewing's for me. Now, it is very rare, and for a lot of people, unfortunately, they don't have the outcome that I had, but simply because it was localized, as in it was in the bone, it never spread. So I was very lucky that the treatment worked very well, and I've had no issues with cancer specifically since. Unfortunately, the treatment that I had was very severe, as it is for everybody, and the lasting damage that I'm now still all these years later dealing with is a result of radiotherapy exclusively. So just to give you a little bit of a brief kind of idea as to what my daily life was like when I was going through radiotherapy, it was for 6 weeks. It was 20 minutes every single day. Well, it was Monday to Friday. It didn't hurt. I literally went into a hospital down in Dublin for 20 minutes a day, lay on a bed while a laser went into my pelvis. And 20 minutes later, I got up and left. And that was as much as I ever thought about radiotherapy. And then a few years later, I basically, in the space of a day, went from being a regular person again to in hospital on morphine. I'd started with a twinge. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing some coursework. I'd gone back to my studies after I got better, and I felt a little twinge in my hip. And I stood up to try and kind of ease out the pain. And within the space of a few hours, the pain got so bad that I had to go into hospital. And from that day to this, I haven't walked the same since. And that was in 2006. Wow. So long story short, I know it was very dramatic. The reason that the pain was so intense and happened so quickly was because after they removed the tumor or during the tumor removal, they had to cut through muscle and nerve tissue. And the nerves to this day have remained, like, they basically had to cut right through them in that area. So I've been left with muscle damage and chronic nerve damage. So when my hip started to deteriorate because of the radiotherapy, it began leaning against the nerves. So I've been told by my doctors, and that once anything kind of goes near damaged nerves, I always describe it as touching a live wire. It sends like shockwaves everywhere. So even moving a position, lying on my back, trying to lie on my side, could have taken maybe 20 minutes, and I would have been drenched in sweat afterwards just from the effort. So that time in my life was very dramatic. I didn't sneeze. This is something that I find so weird that I remember, but I didn't sneeze for 8 months because my body just, at the start, I was so terrified of that involuntary jerking motion that you do when you sneeze would have sent that pain shooting everywhere. So I just wouldn't allow sneezes to happen. And then my body just stopped needing to sneeze. It was so strange. So it was a very dramatic time. And I was so thankful at the end of that year of hell that I was told that I would need a hip replacement. It's an unusual thing for, I think I was 21 at the time, for a 21-year-old to have to face. But after the year of pain, to actually have something like an opportunity to get rid of the pain at the end of this, I jumped at it and I said, yes, let's go, let's get this done. And the very next day after my operation, I was pain-free. So, and I obviously had post-operative pain, but the actual pain that I'd been experiencing because of the nerves was now gone. To say I was relieved is an understatement. It was just, I can't even describe how much relief I felt to have that pain gone. But a few more things have happened since, and I now am on crutches all the time. But as you said, I'm able to climb mountains, so it hasn't really stopped me.
Are you pain free now, or are you is the crutches supporting the hip, or how does that work?
I'd love to be able to say I'm pain free, but unfortunately I'm not. And actually, since our first lockdown here in Ireland last March, my pain skyrocketed. And I put that down to the services that I would have used. So I'm a regular gym goer. I was a regular gym goer, and I also relied heavily on Pilates. Pilates is brilliant for rehabilitative purposes. And when I wasn't able to access either of those services, my pain went through the roof. Now, don't get me wrong, I was within my 5K, I was training still. It was during the summer. The weather was gorgeous, especially here in Donegal. It's very unusual that we get any type of good weather. So we made the most of it, and we got out on the roads and did some training with the crutches. But I don't know why. I'm still trying to find out. I'm waiting on an MRI as we speak to understand why my pain has increased so much. I kind of think it is just down to the fact that I wasn't able to, as I said, access those services. And then I suppose just sitting around more. There's probably lots of reasons, but unfortunately I've actually never been pain-free ever since the first operation because of the nerve damage. So the crutches both help keep me up and help me take the pressure off the leg. So
wow. And just take me back, when you being told age 16 that you've got cancer or bone cancer, what on earth goes through your head? Because that's not the sort of thing that a 16-year-old's expecting to hear from a doctor.
Well, to be honest, what I remember most about that day was the fact that my doctor almost forgot to give me the news at all. Myself and my dad. I know, it's funny. I was so mad with him. Myself and my dad were sitting in the waiting area. So basically, because of the type of cancer that I ended up having, the scan or whatever that they chose was an ultrasound. So I knew by the one that was giving me the ultrasound's face that something wasn't right. I always say she would make a terrible poker player. She gave the game away straight away. So I knew something was wrong, was seriously wrong. And I felt the panic before I even left that room. But she wasn't able to actually give me the news. So that was up to my consultant. So myself and my dad were waiting then afterwards in the waiting area. And I'd say we were waiting about half an hour, and my consultant walked past with his coat on and his briefcase, and he looked like he was heading home for the evening. I was like, that's strange. Has he forgotten that he has one more patient? So we ran after him and said that we were waiting to speak to him. And then I was brought in and I was given the news. But the actual moment that I was told, I don't really remember. What my mind has decided to remember is the fact that he nearly forgot to tell me. But I do remember standing outside the hospital afterwards with my dad. I remember that sheer panic. It was about 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas. So we had that on top of everything. We were told that because it was so close to, everything shutting down for Christmas, that they wouldn't be able to actually start treatment until January. So that was very tough to be told something this life-changing and then told to go home and wait for 2 or 3 weeks while nothing happens. Anybody that's gone through cancer will always say that the wait is the worst. You actually want to just get started, because if you're doing something, then at least you're kind of taking one step towards getting better. But to just sit and wait knowing that you have this thing inside you is, it's really horrible. And for my family, like my poor parents, trying to put on a normal Christmas must for them, you know, what I felt would have only been a fraction of what they would have felt. To have a sick child is, I think, far worse than being sick yourself. And now as an adult, I can see that. So yeah, it was very tough. But to be perfectly honest, once we started, I say we because it was a family affair. Once we started treatment, things, you know, there was a couple of setbacks. You know, there was a very dramatic day where I was in hospital in Donegal being told that I had to be sent to Dublin at the drop of a hat because I had a terrible infection caused by chemo, and I had to go via ambulance. So it was very dramatic. We had the ambulance guys there ready. Like we were all being told that the doctors were there, the ambulance guys were there, my family were there, and I had to go there, and then I wasn't allowed to go home. I had to go straight by ambulance with the blue lights on. So that was quite fun. The whole way to Dublin and stay there for a week or so, because this one thing with chemo is your immune system 10 days afterwards is just at rock bottom. So I just unfortunately picked up an infection, and but other than that, I did lose my hair. That was probably the toughest thing with the chemo. I was 17 then when I had treatment. Being 17 and having no hair as a girl is, you know, I think if it happened now, I wouldn't be as nearly as bothered. But to be 17, where you're constantly embarrassed anyway, it was tough. And I was able to, as much, even though I left school to have treatment, I still went to my prom, and I had to wear a wig, and, you know, things like that. Like, I still don't like to look at the photos to this day because it just reminds me of how I felt then. And so there was a couple of things now that was really challenging, but all in all, it could have been a lot worse. And I did actually experience a lot worse afterwards. So yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Wasn't too bad. I do know what you mean though. When I've broken quite a lot of myself, as we were saying before I hit record,
yeah.
And often when I remember lying there with a whole bunch of broken ribs and a broken sternum, you know, the bit that joins the rib cage together in the middle there, ruptured. Yep. And like, while you're in pain, you actually feel like you've still got some control over who you are and how you are, and everybody else about you has no control at all. Like, and for those people, that observing something is almost worse than actually having it themselves.
I think it's way worse, because, and it depends on, you seem like you have a similar mindset to myself, that, you know, even though you're in pain, you're not sitting there kind of moping about it. You're probably, from the sounds of things and from the sounds of the amount of bones you've broken, you weren't long before you got back on the horse, so to speak. So you weren't afraid to do what you love again. But that must be very tough for the people around you. And same with myself. Like, I've broken my femur, which is a really big bone to break. I basically fell off a chair and broke my femur because I wasn't using my leg. I didn't know that your bones weaken. I knew that you lose muscle, but I didn't realize that the bone density weakens. So I essentially just fell awkwardly off a chair and ended up spending Christmas Day in 2011 in hospital. And at that stage, I'd been through so much surgery that it actually didn't bother me. What bothered me most was not being home for Christmas, because I love Christmas. But once I got over that fact, it was fine. But I know for my family, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And they tried to split the day, have Christmas in the morning. And my dad ended up coming down to Dublin, which is about, back then anyway, it was about a 4-hour drive from Donegal. And he surprised me in the hospital on Christmas Day. He turned up wearing a suit. He looked like he was going to a wedding. And we spent Christmas Day together in the hospital. And, you know, to me, I knew nothing about it until he walked through the door. But you can imagine the planning for them to get that done, to have their Christmas in the morning, and for Dad to get into the car and be there. I think he was in Dublin by midday. Wow. So it was a huge effort on their part, along with being worried about me. And I definitely feel that they suffer more. Yeah. In some ways. Not in every way.
When I was 18, I showed my mum a short video of me going off a waterfall in a kayak. And for me, it was like a proud moment. And I was like, oh, look what I've done. This is what the big professional guys do. And my mum lost her cool completely with me and said she hadn't brought me up to commit suicide and do this and do that and do whatever else.
The key is you don't show your family the videos, you show other people the videos.
That's it. You learn these things quite quickly. And then a few years ago, I broke my right leg. falling off the edge of a waterfall. I slipped off the edge of a
God.
waterfall in Switzerland and hit a big rock at the bottom and shattered my right leg. And I didn't have adequate travel insurance. I had travel insurance for like flat water kayaking, but not whitewater kayaking. So I crawled myself out of a Swiss gorge, like, military commando style, elbow over elbow, because there was no blinking way I was going to pay for a helicopter myself. It had to come out of the insurance. And,
my goodness.
When you've broken so much in the past, it kind of becomes a matter of fact thing. It hurts, it sucks, it's not comfortable, you don't like it, but you equally know that you're fine. Like, you'll be fine.
Yeah. And I completely agree with the matter of fact element that, I think some people are very afraid of staying in hospital. There's people that, my own boyfriend, I don't think he's ever stayed in hospital overnight. And I know that if he had to, he would be probably a blubbering mess. And I would be sitting there rolling my eyes going, will you grow? But at the same time, for someone that's never experienced it before, the blinking lights, the beeping machines, when I was very young, that used to scare me. Nighttime in hospital was a horrible place. Whereas now it's almost soothing, those noises when you hear them. And like when you go in to visit someone in hospital and you smell the awful lunch smell, there's something comforting about it, because it's a strange thing to say, but if you spent enough time in these places, the fear just goes out the window and you're left with, well, that was just part of my life for a while. So I definitely agree. The one thing that I would say, especially with you and your ability to break so many bones, is that we're obviously not invincible. So I think what ends up happening is that you can kind of go to the other end of it, where you think that, sure, it's only another bone that I've broken, and you kind of forget that there may come a day that that bone may not be able to be fixed. And that's where it gets scary again. Or like what I'm dealing with now is issues in my back that have stemmed from years of not walking right. So I'm lucky that I worked with a company here in Ireland last year, and we actually made, I had nothing to do with it. They made a carbon fiber hip brace for me. So I'm starting to, as much as I still want to be super adventurous, I'm starting to get a little bit sensible as I get older, and just, I suppose, think to the future, because I am still relatively young and I can do things on crutches, but I don't want to end up in a chair unless I have to be, that type of thing. And I'm not saying anything against, obviously, if you're in a chair, there's still loads you can do. There's absolutely loads of sports you can do as a wheelchair user, but I'm used to being a crutch user and I would like it to stay that way. So a couple of simple steps like having protection around my hip should give me longer as a crutch user. So, but I am starting to see that, we do all break to the point where we can't be fixed. So it's a little bit of a reality that I don't want to face, but
I found becoming a dad when I became a dad 4.5 years ago, it had suddenly I wasn't looking after me for me anymore. I was looking after me to protect something else. And that made a very big, so like 5 years ago, I fell off the roof of my house whilst painting the wooden fascia boards underneath and broke a bunch of ribs.
I must say, you sound very clumsy.
And I think my risk radar maybe isn't as well tuned in as other people's. I'm like, of course I can walk on the roof of my house. It'll be fine. Anyway, the piece of guttering gave way and then I ended up on the floor, quite a long, about 3 or 4 meters down. And
wow.
Yeah, then when my daughter got born, I suddenly realized that actually now's time to be more cautious, because now I've become responsible for something greater than myself.
And you know what? I'm not a parent myself, but I can totally see why, like instantly overnight, how your thinking has to change. And it's not stopping you from doing what you love. It's just your thought process before you go into something has to change slightly. And I suppose there's nothing wrong with that. The more prepared you are, the more opportunities there are as well. So just to briefly give you an example of that, with one of the challenges we did, we planned a trip to Iceland to scale a route of the Solheimjökull Glacier. It was one of the most looking at your background reminds me of it. It was just everywhere you went was more beautiful than the last piece of scenery. And we initially, now it was obviously we were trying to do it on a shoestring. So we were cutting corners as much as we could. But one of the pieces of advice that we were given by my mentor here in Ireland, who's a professional climber, said, don't scrimp and save when it comes to the guide that you pick. Pick the best guide, because you're scaling a glacier. You're very much in their territory. You haven't a clue what you're doing. You're just following orders, which is true. All of my challenges, I never know what I'm doing. I'm just following orders. And he said, doesn't matter what it costs, go for the best. And I'm so glad that we did, because we actually ended up spending, I'd say it was over €1,000 for about 5 or 6 hours of their time, which as far as I'm concerned, is a lot of money. But the guy, and he ended up taking a second guide with him. They had, they were rope access technicians, I think it is. So basically they were able to use proper harnesses, ropes, etc. And even though we didn't technically need that for the walk, it was great that they had that skill, because we actually stumbled across a 45-foot ice cave. This wasn't part of our challenge. It was just a complete surprise. We essentially turned a corner and found a huge pothole. And because of their skills and because of their own pre-planning, we were able to actually abseil into that 45-foot ice cave. I was the only one that was able to get to the bottom because we didn't have enough ropes for everybody. I didn't even have a camera with me. So I just got that once in a lifetime opportunity that I couldn't even record. But if it hadn't have been for their kind of pre-planning and their skills, we would have just had to look in from above and keep walking. So that kind of opened my eyes a little bit into what you can do, what more you can do, and what more you can bring to the table if you put in a bit more planning at the start of it. Because I used to just rock up to stuff and not even train enough for it. I would just presume, because I have a strong mindset, that I'd be fine. And as much as you get through it, but you don't perform to the same level as when you actually put in the effort, I suppose, in the pre-planning.
So were you into the outdoors and adventurous stuff when you were a kid, or is this something later in life?
I always loved kind of running about. I always loved being outside, playing with my friends, playing like games outside. I much preferred that than, say, sitting in front of a computer screen or something like that. And I did gymnastics. I suppose that was the most activity-based thing that I enjoyed doing. But in my teens, I very much didn't. Like before I got sick, maybe it was just because I was a teenager, but I was quite lazy and didn't really do a whole lot at all. No, definitely for me, the adventurous side of myself came out through illness. And it began with 1 or 2 challenges and meeting people that were already people like yourself that kind of, are in the outdoors, that have maybe made a living with the outdoors. And the more of those type of people that I met and were introduced to, say, somebody that knows one person, knows another person. And before you know it, you're in a full circle of people that love the same thing as you do. And that's where, the sky's the limit then. Suddenly you're surrounded by like-minded people who have done amazing things and you want to do what they've done. And yeah.
How were your parents when you first told them you had this seed? I don't know what it was, and I'll ask in a second, but you had your original seed of an idea to go and do a challenge. And they're looking at you. I'm just dropping myself into their shoes. They're looking at you thinking, thank goodness she's like not pain-free, but like she's not got cancer anymore. She's got a false bone in her hip, but I mean, it's better than what she had before. Like suddenly she's got herself back on the road to recovery, and now she's going to go and, I don't know, climb a hill or do whatever it might be. How are they?
Well, the way it happened allowed them to kind of be lulled into a false sense of security, I think, because so the way it happened was I was at a stage. So it was about, I think it was 2013, and I was still in quite a lot of pain. At this stage, I'd had my hip replaced twice. I'd had the femur break at this stage. This is all on the right-hand side. So my left side was totally fine, but the right side had been replaced twice. I had the broken femur, which had resulted in them fitting a metal plate that ran from, and it still runs from my hip down to my knee. And I had a significant leg length discrepancy. So at the moment I have a 10 centimeter leg length discrepancy. So even everyday balance is, just standing still isn't easy. Which kind of, I never liked standing still anyway, so I suppose it didn't really make a huge difference. But we decided between myself, a physiotherapist, and a personal trainer, we devised a 3-month training plan. So it got me into the gym, strengthening the parts of me that could be strengthened. Because one thing that I realized by 2013 was that I'd focused for so long on one part of my body, which was my right hip and my right leg. And all we focused on was that it was weak and that it was damaged and that it was, all negative stuff. But the rest of my body was perfectly fine and was ignored for years. So once we shifted our focus and started looking at what we could do with the rest of the body, that's where doors started flying open in terms of opportunity. So by the end of that 3 months, and just to give you an idea of what we did, it was normal training. It was a little bit like CrossFit was starting to get popular at the time. So we did a bit of weightlifting. We were trying to get chin-ups and pull-ups and all these things that I'd seen girls do, especially that, girls were starting to do more of this type of thing, weight-based stuff. And I loved that. I thought, like, finally, we're not just expected to be skinny, that, it's nice to look strong. So that was kind of what I got into my head. So I stopped focusing on my leg and I started focusing on seeing muscle definition. And I remember looking in the mirror at the gym and seeing muscles in my arms for the first time and thinking how good I looked. And once I saw that, I was hooked. I was like, right, I don't want to become, a bodybuilder, but I do want to get lean. I do want to see, my body fat go down and the muscle go up. And then before I knew it, I was looking forward to going to the gym just simply to train. It wasn't to remove the pain anymore. It was just because I was enjoying it. The 3 months flew by. And my pain was at its lowest that it had been since my first operation. I'd stopped taking my pain medication. There was huge differences in that short space of time. So then it became about, right, if we can do that in 3 months, what else can we do? So we decided to take it outside of the gym. And it was around this time that I'd set up my campaign, Fighting Fit for Ewings. So I wanted to kind of give back. Obviously, I'd been cared for so long by incredible people. I wanted to do something now that I was out the other side of it to give back and to show other people that were on the same road as me that, you can do different things regardless of whether you rely on crutches or a wheelchair or whatever. So we thought to keep the campaign fun and interesting that we would base it around physical challenges. So the very first challenge I did was climb a mountain here in Donegal called Muckish Mountain. Now, it's not the biggest in Donegal, but it's challenging. It certainly was for me. It was my first mountain I had climbed as an adult. So I had no idea what to expect. Absolutely none. I remember what I even wore on the day. I cringe thinking about it now because it's just couldn't have been more wrong. It was October. It was Donegal. It was Ireland. So it was cold. It was wet. It was dark, grey and miserable. And there was sheep everywhere. That was basically the day in a nutshell. And as much as it was a climb that I've climbed Muckish absolutely oodles of times since, and I love it. And I often climb the much harder route now because it's more enjoyable. But a climb that should have taken us at most 2 hours, 2.5 hours, took us over 6. Essentially because we got lost. The reason was, as I said, about the wind and rain. We couldn't have picked a worse day to climb. The weather was absolutely awful. We couldn't see our hand in front of our faces. We actually had to use whistles to know how far away the other person was. It was just a complete whiteout. So it took a very long time to get to the top and to the bottom. But we got there. And when I went home that night, to say I was in pain was an understatement. I was my whole body had seized up, and not just the sore leg, but all of me, because I suppose my body was in shock, going, what in God's name have you done to me today? Like, you've moved more today than you have in your entire life. So that night then following morning, oh my God, just so stiff, but I was so happy. I went to bed that night so happy and so proud of myself. And I was really glad that the weather had been as bad as it was, because it made me realize that if I could do that in that type of weather, what could I do on a good day? And that was it was almost like, people talk about light bulb moments. I swear to God, it was like a cartoon. I'd just become animated and there was an actual light bulb above my head. Like that was a turning point for me. And from there, I didn't really, in terms of the challenges, I never really looked back. Straight away, because we started with a mountain, because we didn't start small, it meant like, where do you go from there? You have to keep going either higher or further or longer endurance. We had to keep upping the ante. And that's kind of what we did. And it just turned into one big adventure.
That's incredible. And so you've now spent the past, 10, 12 years doing these adventures? Is that about? No, 2013.
Well, no, so it was 2013. So what are we on now? Well, yeah, like a long time. 8 years are we on? Yeah. So it's every year we try and get at least one big challenge in. So just to run through a few of them, we did, as I said, we scaled the glacier in Iceland. I completed the Fan Dance in Wales, which is a 24-kilometer trek up and down the Penny Fan twice. We did the winter edition. There's the summer and the winter edition. And I knew I'd only do that particular challenge once. So I decided that I would do the harder one because, well, for starters, I prefer the cold. So I actually think even though the summer edition is technically easier, I think I would have found it more difficult because climbing up and down a mountain on crutches, especially something like the Penny Fan in heat, where you've got the sun beating down your back, I think that would be just disgusting. I'd much prefer snow and cold weather. So that was incredible.
Just for our American viewers out there who may not know what the Fan Dance is, up until a few years ago, the Fan Dance was the last of the physical endurance tests for the UK Special Forces that they went and did before they went on to their sort of trade-specific using guns and shooting shit training. And so it's the last.
I think that's the official name for it. Guns and shooting shit training.
Guns and shooting shit training. I could be in the military. Never. But yeah, the Fan Dance is the last physical endurance test for the Special Forces here in the UK. So you've done that on crutches.
I did that on crutches. I actually had to ask for permission because what I loved about that challenge is that it's organized by ex-military personnel. So it's run to a T. I mean, if I was to show you the email correspondence that I'd received from them in the lead up to it, I would be, oh my God, I wouldn't even be able to count the amount of emails that came in. And within each email, there was a list about a mile long of things that we were told we had to have done in the lead up, we had to have on the day. So one of the things is you have to carry a backpack, and it can't just, it's weighted, and it is weighed before you start. And if it's underweight, you won't be allowed to do it. There's so many reasons that will stop you from getting to the start line because of their rules. So you have to have things in the backpack that you will actually be able to use if you become stranded on the mountain, because that's what they would have done in the Special Forces. So I loved that side of it. I loved that you were following in their footsteps, quite literally, because you were going on the same route that they did. And the people that do it, a lot of them themselves are in the military, and they're maybe doing it as a charity fundraiser for fallen men and women. And there's just so much emotion attached to that particular challenge. But also they take no shit, absolutely none. If you don't turn up wearing the right boots or the right rain gear, you're turned away. And it doesn't matter where you've traveled from. There's people that travel from, like I myself traveled from a different country to get there. If I wasn't wearing the right gear, I would be turned away, because in every one of those emails, you're reminded constantly what you need to bring. So their opinion is, if you have got to the start line without looking at least one of those emails, then you don't deserve to be here. And I just think that is amazing that they're so strict, because it makes it all the more of a challenge to do, and also the more of an accomplishment when you get to the finish line. So no, that was probably my favorite challenge to date. It was absolutely incredible, but it was also one of the toughest. One of the routes, or one of the areas of the route, is called Jacob's Ladder. And I will never, ever forget trying to walk up that in driving hail and snow. Oh my God, it was just, there's actually video footage of me, and it looks like the video has been slowed down, but I actually am just walking that slow. I physically couldn't walk any slower. And yet what I love about the video that I'm referring to is that there's a guy behind me. He looks physically fit. He actually looked like he was in the army, and I didn't realize I didn't see what was happening until I looked at the video footage afterwards. But as I'm struggling along with my crutches and my backpack, he actually stops behind me, either to throw up or to lean over. You can see him leaning over because he physically couldn't go on. And the fact that a girl on crutches overtook him, I just love that video so much. But it really was incredible. But anyway, I could talk about that all day, but that was one of the challenges. The Four Peaks was one I did in 2018. So I actually became the first crutch user in Ireland to do a 4-peak challenge on crutches. So we started with the biggest, obviously started with the biggest mountain in Ireland, which is Carrauntoohil in Kerry. And we then went on and did 3 others in 3 different counties. So the part of the challenge was actually getting to each county, getting the mountain done, back in our mode of transport onto the next one. So there was no rest. So for 32 hours, we just went until we got to the final mountain, which was here in Donegal. So I slept for, I think, a full day after that one. But again, it was incredible. You know, some of the people, the media kind of picked up on that one, I suppose, here in Ireland. And everywhere we went, there were people waiting to speak to us and share their stories. So for that reason alone, that one was probably the most emotional challenge I've done. Well, I know the fan dance was emotional in itself, but just to meet other people and hear their stories. One of the mountains we did, I met my first Ewing's patient that had come out the other side and had actually lost his leg as a result, but was still fighting fit. And he'd heard about our story on the local news or whatever, and had come out to meet us. And he'd never actually, as much as he lived near the mountain we were going to, he'd never actually attempted to hike any of it because he was an amputee. And I think he worried about, there's quite a lot of loose ground. And he worried, I suppose, like anybody would, about falling. So the two of us walked part of it together. So for me to see him do that was absolutely incredible. And for him to achieve that himself was unbelievable. And just, you know, those kind of things, you don't expect that to happen when you take on that type of a challenge. You kind of just selfishly think of yourself and think, right, I have to get through this. I have to do this, that, and the other. But what you don't expect is to meet people like him that have been through far more than I have. Like, to have lost his leg from, I think he'd lost his full leg, so from the hip. And to be going around for the past maybe 10 or 20 years as an amputee, you know, and for him to still be able to do these things, to get to at least even the car park of that mountain, never mind start hiking up it. It was just incredible. And it's people like him that make all these challenges so worthwhile that, you know, it makes you want to just plan the next one as soon as possible.
That's incredible. I mean, we've all been touched by cancer in some way throughout our lives, be it ourselves personally or loved ones, friends. What advice do you have for people who are suffering with cancer at this point in time, in terms of helping them see the end, the light at the end of the tunnel? Because 40 years ago, if you had cancer, you were dead. In 2021, if you have cancer, the likelihood of surviving is remarkably high, but it's a pretty shit thing to go through.
It is. And I have to say, in 2020 and now coming into 2021, to have cancer now, I take my hat off to you, because one of the big things that got me through my treatment was my family, and having my family there. Because of the last year, because of COVID and not being allowed to have your family with you, that changes the game significantly. And I regardless of what type of cancer you have, regardless of how much medicine has moved forward, that is a huge thing to have to go through by yourself, or to maybe have to have been given that diagnosis by yourself because you weren't allowed to have somebody in with you. You know, there's so many untold stories from the last year that I think we need to hear, of people going through cancer now in the modern day with coronavirus happening in the world. So I don't know. I have huge admiration for anybody that's dealing with a serious illness right now. It must be a very lonely time. What I would say is they are very lucky in that they have access to the internet. That's one thing I didn't have in Ireland in 2003. We had dial-up. Do you remember that?
Yeah, just about.
And now if you were on the landline, you weren't able to use the internet. Like, that sounds so alien now. When I have a plug in my house that Alexa controls my lights, to think that I have that now, and yet I wasn't able to use the internet if somebody was on the phone back when I was going through treatment, seems crazy. But that was my reality. So when I was hit with the diagnosis that even the doctor that diagnosed me wasn't fully sure what exactly it was, that's terrifying. That's so isolating. And the fact that I had to travel to the UK to have my tumor removed was proof that in Ireland, my surgeons they admitted it, they weren't comfortable removing a tumor that they just didn't see every day. So one advantage with people that are having treatment now is that they can find people that have gone through treatment before. They can find, services that will help them, motivational athletes that they can aspire to become when they come out the other side. So what I definitely would say to people is make the most of that. Find somebody that you look up to that has maybe the same cancer that you have, and find somebody that's doing something incredibly fun, because that was the one thing that I wanted to do. I was so sick of not having fun. I was so sick of being in hospital, having drips attached to me, having no hair, all this. I just wanted to have fun. And once I was able to find people that were doing cool things, suddenly it brought back, I don't know, something became alive within me again, and it changed everything. So I would say just make the most of having access to the internet, and you will be fine. It's all about mindset. You know yourself, Rob, like it's all about mindset. And once you have a good mindset. I often say that
mindset is the volume control on the rest of your body. And the more you can work on the mindset, the more able the rest of your body will be.
It's so
I was actually curious about, you say you've been in pain since you couldn't go to the gym and whatever else. And I don't know whether, I wonder whether any of that is headspace related. The gym sounds like it's been such a incredible, I won't say crutch because you're on crutches, but such an incredible support to who you are and how you haven't been defeated. I wonder whether just that going away is missing something.
There's no wondering about it. It's a fact. I completely think that it is down to the fact that I can't be in pain for any other reason. So when I went training, every bit of you was sore. So it wasn't just your hip or your back that was sore. It was your arms. It was your baby finger. It was everything. Especially the gym that I was going to, they were always pushing you harder and harder, which is great. That's what you want. They very few treadmills. It's not a conventional gym at all. It's all about, just using battle ropes and using different pieces of equipment. So you were always sore. And I do think that distracted you. I also think from, just within your brain can only focus on pain it can only focus on where the pain is at any one time. As much as it will register pain everywhere, it will hone in on different elements of pain and different types. So anytime I get my bloods done, to distract myself from the scratch going into my arm, I'll always either wiggle my toes or dig my nails into my hand. That was a tip that one of my nurses gave me many moons ago, because your brain then thinks that it's your hand that's sore. So it'll recognize the little pinch that you're giving yourself versus the pinch from the needle. Now, as much as it's probably the same level of pain, I just personally don't really like needles. I don't like the thought of them. So it probably seems worse to me, even though it's just a tiny little scratch. And it's the same with if I'm sitting on the couch thinking my hip is absolutely killing me, or I can barely get up because my back is so sore. That's because I have all the time in the world to think about that. Whereas if I walked in from the gym and every bit of me was sore, and then I went to get up and my back was sore, my hip was sore, but also my shoulders and my arms and everything, I would just put that down to, that was a good training session. And suddenly that pain is fine and it's justifiable and it's worth it almost.
Everybody else in that training session's got the same degree of pain to maybe not in their hip, but they've done the push-ups, the pull-ups, the burpees, the battle rope, the deadlifts, the whatever it is, the same as you've done. I used to do a lot of CrossFit, so I kind of know what CrossFit pain can feel like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I don't even do
level,
CrossFit. I just do something similar to it. That's box jumps. I've tried them and I've seen the shin accidents and the open. Oh God, no. So, but yeah, the other thing is that I think when you do a really good workout and you feel pain afterwards, it's the same as how I feel when I do my adventuring. When you're in pain after a really long trek, you are sore, but the pride you feel overrides the pain. So you nearly see that pain as your badge of honor. But when I was experiencing pain during lockdown, and now the pain that I have in my back just from getting up out of the chair, for anybody, but for someone like me that doesn't like to feel that they have to slow down, I really struggle with that in my head, because in my head, I'm like, well, I haven't done a workout, so why am I sore? Why is my back sore just from getting up? I'm not 90. I shouldn't be having this level of pain just from standing up. And as much as it is what it is, I have severe injuries, and that is the way it's going to be. But I really struggle to accept that. So I would nearly prefer, even in this level of pain, that's why I went for my walk first thing this morning, even though I was in pain, because now as the day goes on, when the rest of me starts getting sore, I can just be like, oh, well, that's because I went for a walk earlier. And that's like tricking my mind into making all the pain tolerable. And it's what gets you through. It really is. It's what I do believe that is a lot of getting through pain is mind trickery and distraction. And like I've listened to a lot of different podcasts and different people that have the same understanding of how you can put up with severe pain through your own way of thinking. I find it very interesting. And that's why I'm raging that we're in another lockdown, because I was so looking forward to getting back into the gym and really going hell for leather now that I'm in this pain, because I want to actually, I'm curious to see what I can actually do, and how it'll be afterwards. Will I actually feel any worse, or will I just feel the same? So
it's interesting that there's a psychological theory out there that would suggest that everything that we know or can put a label to, we've learned at some point in time. So at some point in time, we went ouch, and somebody said, oh, is that painful? And then you identify ouch and pain in the same category as a neurological link or a pathway in the brain. And I remember as a child, my uncle Michael, who's now passed away, unfortunately, we go to his house in the middle of winter in the UK, and it would be freezing cold, and yet he'd be in short sleeves, and he'd thought himself warm. Literally, you could sit and watch his complexion change from looking like cold and clammy, not like pale, to flushed and rosy in under 10 minutes. And it wasn't he did anything other than sat and thought himself warm.
That's incredible.
And
he must have been a very stubborn man.
Very, very one of the most stubborn men you will ever meet. Actually, I'll have to ask my mum more about him. He's my mum's brother, but very stubborn.
Yeah.
And then I did a course in neurolinguistic programming a few years ago, where they have an exercise to do with letting go of pain. And when you identify pain, you think about the biggest emotion that you feel linked to that pain. And then you just let yourself feel it to like a really, really deep level, even if that involves you weeping for 2 minutes. But you're not thinking about the pain, you're thinking about anger, for instance. And then you think about the next emotion and just feel that. It doesn't matter what it is, joy, happiness, negative or positive, there's no value on it. Yeah. And it's amazing, after 6 to 10 emotions and letting yourself feel it in like 15 minutes. I remember when I broke my right leg, the pain just disappeared. And I don't think it has disappeared. I just think that physically your body is still going, that's not right, because that's ultimately what pain is. It's your body saying this isn't right, but your brain seems to disconnect from it, and it goes away for 6, 12, 18 hours. It's just phenomenal.
It is. It's incredible. And like the other side to that is, and I found myself, especially because I have nerve pain is such a little tricky weasel of a pain that
weasel of a pain.
It's a weasel of a pain. sometimes wonder, are you in pain at all? That now, going back to before my first operation, I spent 10 weeks in St. Vincent's Hospital in Dublin, the entire summer period, and that was, I was saying to you about not being able to sneeze. That was when I wouldn't allow people to sit on my bed. I wouldn't allow any sudden movements near me, because the pain would just send shockwaves absolutely everywhere. And it was all down to nerve pain. At the end of that 10 weeks, I was sent home. They did every test that they could muster up, and they couldn't find a reason for this pain. And they actually suggested that I had, I think it's called CRPS. It's basically phantom pain. It's where amputees feel pain where the limb used to be. So it's all kind of stemming from the brain. And I couldn't believe that they were coming to me with this, considering I still had all my limbs. But it just, what it told me was that they didn't really believe that I was in pain at all, because I had no physical signs. I had no like big open wounds or anything. So I spent a lot of that time thinking that I was making it up, or that I was exaggerating the pain. Now, fast forward almost a year later. So I went home and just spent months in and out of hospital having more scans, but being told nothing that really changed anything, until finally I was told, actually, your nerves are massively disrupting the damaged hip that's been caused by the radiotherapy. You're going to need a hip replacement. So to go from them kind of thinking that there was nothing there at all to having to have an entire part of my body taken out made me think, well, at least the pain is real. But there's so many times, like, because I started using methods to combat the pain, because it was all I could do. There was literally nothing that would help. There definitely were days where, and even to this day, you know, with the situation that's going on with my back, there are days where I'm like, well, the pain was up the top of my back a few days ago, and now it's down the bottom. You know, am I actually making all of this up? And then you try and get out of the chair, and you're like an upturned turtle, and you're like, no, this is real. Like, I'm not lying. But you do have days where you doubt yourself, and I think the stronger your mind becomes, the more you doubt yourself. Because you've experienced really bad pain before. I don't know, there is a fine line there, I think.
How do you ensure that in all of your adventures, that obviously with nerve damage and muscle damage, there is a slight danger of doing more harm than good? How do you manage that whilst you're abseiling down your lighthouse, or going across a ridge, or I see even here driving a rally car? Like, how do you manage
that was fun.
doing less harm than good, or doing more good than harm? I don't know.
Well, it's all about, we've touched on these, but it's all about being prepared. So the rally car part, the hardest part of that entire day was getting in and out of the car, because there's the big wrought iron cage. So because my hip is in a seated position, my hip is almost fused. So I can't really lift my leg off the ground or bend my knee up towards me if I'm sitting down. I can do it when I'm standing up, but not when I'm sitting down. So when you try and sit into a car and then lift your leg in, I physically can't do that. So we were, short of me being like lifted up and just thrown into the car, we spent nearly 10 minutes trying to figure out how to get me in. Now, once I got in, it was just driving a car really fast. It was great. It was brilliant fun. But that was the easy part. And it's the same with when I'm hiking. You know, it's just it's technically just walking up and down a hill, but obviously at any moment I could slip and fall and whatever. So it's all about preparation. So the crutches I use are carbon fiber. The hip brace that I had made is carbon fiber. Two extremely light things, but really, really durable. You know, my left crutch, which is the one I use day to day, has fallen. I went to my cousin's wedding in Malta, and I went to lean it up against a balcony 3 floors up, and I miscalculated where to put it, and it fell through the railing, fell 3 floors down. Thankfully, there was nobody beneath the balcony, but the crutch was completely fine. There was nothing wrong with it.
You didn't find a dead body on the ground.
Except for like the massacre of people on the floor. No, thankfully there was nobody underneath. But before I got those particular crutches, I have a picture somewhere on my Facebook page where I had an entire wall just filled with crutches that I had gone through in the space of months, because I just was so sore on them because I used them for such extreme measures. These crutches I've had since 2014, and they're still, as much as they're scratched to bits, and they have like every little bit of challenge that I've done etched on them somewhere, they're still perfectly straight because of the carbon fiber. So and the hip brace, if I fell, I've got a carbon fiber and metal protecting my hip from the ground. And that's the difference. And that's certainly as I get older, I'm more like, I reached out to specialists to have that hip brace made, and I would continue to do that for pieces of equipment in the future, because I don't want to be the reason that I end up an amputee. And the reason that I say that is because the last time I visited my consultants in Birmingham, which is where they're based, I was told that I can't face any more surgery on my right hip, that unless things change drastically within medical science, that my next big operation will be full right leg amputation. I can't have another hip replacement because the bone is too badly damaged. It's actually, the blood supply is no more and the bone is dead. So I'd done huge research myself. I'd found places in America that are excelling in bone rejuvenation, and they were doing 3D printing, just absolutely incredible things. And I brought all these pieces of research to my doctor, and he said that I'm too far gone for any of that to work because I don't have a blood supply. And for anything to be attached to the bone, you first need to have that. And that's why my second hip replacement didn't work, even though the prosthetic piece was custom made to fuse with the bone and become part of my body. Because the bone was badly damaged, it never happened. And that's why I ended up with such significant leg length discrepancy, because the prosthesis had nothing to anchor it in place. So it ended up actually just moving upwards and moving wherever it wanted to. So I now have a loose hip. So I'm at even more risk now since my second hip replacement than ever before. But I was told about that amputation news maybe four years ago, possibly close to 5 years ago now. And my doctor told me that he couldn't, by looking at my scans, he couldn't give me a time frame as to when that operation would happen. He'd shared my x-rays with his colleagues, and they couldn't believe that I was able to do anything, let alone scale mountains and, do all the rest of it. The last time I met him was the same week I did the fan dance. He didn't know about it until afterwards. I connected with him on LinkedIn afterwards, and that's where he found out. So he had no idea that I did any of that. And he couldn't believe that I was able to just even, drive or do normal day-to-day things. And that's all down to a mindset, but also good equipment and being sensible when you need to be sensible.
And so you mentioned before we came on air that your next mission, challenge, whatever you want to call it, is Kilimanjaro here in Africa.
Yep.
On crutches. Tell us about that. What's happening? What's the plan? Tell me more.
So if we hadn't have all faced the toughest year of our lives, I would have actually already done it. So because of COVID, it was put back. So we were meant to do it last August. But last April, I was told that just due to the rise in cases, etc., they were going to have to call off the adventure for last year. So we've changed it to August of this year, which is fine. Gives me a bit more time to pretend I'm training when really I'm not. I really need to start training. But yeah, so the plan is to climb Kilimanjaro. It'll take 6 days, I think. And it'll be, I don't know how many hours a day of constant trekking. I've never done anything like it before. The closest I have done to this, I suppose the closest I've come to this level of adventure is the 4 Peak Challenge, which was 32 hours of trekking. And I still got to sit in a car for a few hours in between. This will be, now we will be sleeping at night. We won't be going, 24/7. But it will be most definitely the toughest thing I've ever done as a human, never mind as a crutch user. And I've absolutely no idea if I can do it. But what I do know is that I'll give it my best shot. And that's the attitude I always go in with. I know that I perform better on the day than I do in the lead up to it. I was the same when I was at school. I wasn't a big fan of putting in huge amounts of study, but on the day when the day arrived or the night before, that's when I finally decided, right, I need to take this seriously. Now, obviously with the likes of Kilimanjaro, I won't be waiting till the night before to start my training. I've already built up a level of training from the years previous. but I will be taking this one very seriously, even in terms of equipment. You know, the month or two before we go, I'll probably have my bag packed for at least a month before I go, because I need to have enough time to forget things and then remember them before I actually leave, because once we get there, it's too late. And nobody else is going to be able to say, oh yeah, well, I use this, so you can use that, because no one else is doing this on their second hip replacement on crutches. You know, things like I'll need to have something to sleep on that is made of memory foam, because everywhere in my house, the seat I'm sitting on now has a memory foam cushion. My vanity table, the stool has a memory foam cushion. My car has to have special. My bed has to be specially, you know, everything that I sit or stand against or whatever, not stand against, but everything I sit or lie on has to have memory foam. Otherwise, the pain will be almost instantly there. And if I'm lying in a camping situation overnight and then expected to hike for maybe 8 or 10 hours the next day, and I don't have something good to lie on, then that day is ended before it's even begun. So for me, this will be the biggest exercise in preparation that I've ever undertaken. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what actually happens if I get anywhere near the top.
It'll be an adventure no matter what happens.
Certainly will. And you know what, you know, I'm fairly certain I will get to the top, because just like your uncle from times gone, I'm quite stubborn. I've been called that numerous times. And when you're surrounded by people that are also putting themselves through, they don't need to be on crutches to be in serious pain climbing Kilimanjaro. It's not an easy mountain to climb. It's going to take every ounce of their strength to get to the top and to get back down. You know, you get your selfie at the top and then you kind of forget that you don't just get airlifted off. You have to also get back down. And we'll be dealing with, this will be my first time dealing with any type of, what is it? Well, the word is
altitude sickness and stuff like that.
That's it, yeah, altitude. Yeah, I've never done anything that I've needed to worry about that before. So, you know, I could be at the fittest I've ever been, and altitude could stop me in my tracks. So there will be things that I'll be outside of my control, but everything that will be in my control will certainly be looked after.
It's interesting you mentioned the selfie at the top. I've climbed a few big peaks in my time, a couple in the Himalayas and the European Alps and a few other places. And you know, you get the picture at the top, and what nobody talks about is how much it sucks going down. Whatever you thought it sucked like going up, I think you could double it on the way back down. It's just horrible.
You see, and this is where I'm lucky in that I love going down a mountain, because I have the one thing that now, for the likes of Kilimanjaro, most people will have walking poles, but for regular mountains, people, they kind of forget to use them. Whereas I just happen to have them every day. So I can pick up speed on the way down, whereas I'm really slow going up the mountain, just simply because of the lack of power in my leg. And once my leg gets tired, it feels like a dead weight. So you're not physically dragging it behind you, but not far away from that. It's extremely difficult going uphill. So that will be, for me, the thought of going back down will get me up, if that makes sense. But I can totally understand something as big as Kili, where you're not just going to be down by the evening time. It's a few days or whatever to get back down. It's that's where the mental strength will really need, you know, it'll need to be strong. But I do think people forget that. And it's, you know, it's one of the reasons that there are so many issues with mountaineering. There's so many reasons that mountain rescue is called out, is because people underestimate, first of all, Mother Nature and the sheer size of the monster that they're climbing. And they just think about that feeling at the top. And then they just think that a taxi is going to come and bring them down. But unfortunately, that's not what happens.
I remember I was guiding a group in the Lake District in the UK. Crikey, it must be 20 years ago now. I'm a mountain leader, a qualified mountain leader.
Right.
And I'm up on top of Helvellyn, which is the highest peak in the Lake District. And there's a little shelter up there. It's like two stone walls that form a cross. And then depending upon where the wind comes from, you can kind of hide away from the wind. And it's November, it's snowing, it's the howling. It's probably like how your the peak you climbed in Ireland was.
Yeah.
And there's a family up there wearing jeans and trainers and very cheap waterproof jackets with a road map of the United Kingdom, asking how they got back to the car. And pointing at a ridge line that is called Striding Edge. And I just remember having this blazing argument with the dad eventually, because I was like, don't go that way. Like, take the long route. There'll be a path, just and follow it. It'll take 5 hours, but you'll be safe and you'll get to the car.
Yeah.
And I think people think, it's a blue sky, it's a nice morning, and we're going to go up that hill. And they forget that in UK and Ireland, the weather can change in this like that. And well, thank goodness for mobile phones, I suppose, in some regards.
What the biggest mistake is that they see a nice day on at the base of the mountain, so they think that it's going to be like that the whole way up, and that's one of the biggest mistakes, because as you've said, like the weather can change instantly. But the higher up you go, you're obviously dealing with colder conditions, etc. But just when you mentioned jeans, that to this day still baffles me. The amount of people that hike in jeans is incredible, and especially here in Ireland, where, as I said, in the middle of the summer, you are not guaranteed a good day. It could be absolutely pouring rain in the middle of July. So to climb a mountain in jeans, where if they get wet, you have 2 pieces of lead attached to you now. I don't know, but you know what? The one thing I will say is people lucky enough to get back down again will not do that again. If they get caught in that family, if they've any sense, will never, ever, ever do that again. And it's as much as it's a horrible lesson they had to learn, especially if there was kids involved. Sometimes you do, as I said before we started recording, or maybe we were recording, but the first mountain I climbed, I looked like I was just going to the gym. I was wearing leggings, and back then I didn't want to invest in good outdoor gear, because my opinion was, well, like, I don't wear that all the time, so I'll just buy the cheap stuff. No. But I had to learn that the hard way. And now I spend all my money on my outdoor gear, and I don't care what I look like day to day. It's the complete opposite now.
I know the feeling. It's interesting. There's a firm in the UK called Alp Kit that used to make jeans that were for the outdoors. So they look like jeans and feel like jeans, but they don't absorb water. They repel water. They stretch. It's like a pair of hiking trousers, but they look and feel like jeans.
They're camouflaged as jeans.
Yeah. They're actually like blue denim in the color. They look just, if you were to be the beauty of them was, and I gave away my pair. The beauty of it is that you didn't ever have to change from anything to go to the pub. You just kind of came off the hill and walked straight into the pub, and I like that. You fitted straight in with your jeans on. But suddenly I got this thing where people started to say, oh, well, Rob's wearing jeans hiking, so it'll be fine. And they didn't know that they weren't jeans.
That they weren't jeans.
They were from Next or some store. Or Levi's. And in the end, I thought, actually, I need to get shot of these, because I'm giving people the wrong message.
But part of the joy of sitting in the pub with muck all over your legs and your runners or your boots all wrecked is that you're enjoying your drink, because the first drink or the first piece of food you have after a hike will taste like heaven on earth. The first pint is just the nicest drink you'll ever have. And part of that is that you're in your little group and you're all in your mountaineering gear. And yes, you don't fit in with everyone that's in, glammed up to the nines, but that's okay, because you're in your own little bubble. I actually quite like that. I like that, you're still in your full hiking gear, that you have your backpack down beside you. And there's actually, I don't know, it's, again, I say it's like your badge of honor that you did something pretty cool today, and now you're having your well-earned drink. And I don't know, so I often wonder, like, why would you want to be seen wearing jeans up a mountain? That would be like going to a nightclub in snow gear. Like, it makes, the two don't make any sense.
I think it's the novelty. People always say, oh, don't wear jeans in the mountains. And then somebody gives you a pair of jeans that you can wear in the mountains.
That you can wear. Yeah, it's a game changer.
Yeah, that's it. So you've got your campaign, Fight for Ewings. Is there any way that people can support you with it, or get involved with it, or anything like that?
Yeah, well, the campaign, so I suppose, unfortunately, due to, and I keep going back to this, but especially here in Ireland, due to we're level 5 at the moment, so we're very locked down at the moment. So my challenges are kind of on hold, apart from Kili. So just, it is Fighting Fit for Ewings. It's on Facebook if you search it. It's through Instagram, Nikki Bradley Speaks. So I'm on all social media, and I discuss the challenges when they happen across the board. And also my website, motivationfactory.ie, gives you a better idea of kind of who I am, other than what I've just explained here. But yeah, so if people want to, what I would say is use, especially the Facebook page, use it as somewhere to share your own challenges and your own, whether it be with illness or whether it be with just everyday life, and also what you're doing to overcome that. Because what we want to do with the campaign is certainly give people a platform to share what they're going through, but to encourage people to not focus on that and to not let your illness be your defining thing in life. Certainly have it be a huge part of your life, but use it to then fuel a passion within you and find something that you can excel at as a result of it. So I always think that my illness was the making of me. Absolutely. I have no doubt that it was the thing that made me the person that I am today, because it completely changed how I go about my daily life, and it changed my interests. It changed absolutely everything about me. And I came out the other side wanting to be better, wanting to be a better person and to do cooler things. And that's what I want other people to share, is the cool things that they're doing now as a result of something that they've faced. So if you do have that kind of a story, please do share it on the page and send loads of pictures. And, you know, I will certainly share them across other social media platforms, because that's what it's all about. It's especially in the world we're in now. Let's share some good news for once.
Done. I actually have my own story to go. I'll go and pop on there. Nothing to do with cancer, to do with something that's quite dramatic that happened to me.
Excellent.
Nikki, I just want to say thank you, because you know, the Tony Robbins, the famous motivational coach, speaker, whatever else, he has something that he says that whenever anything happens to us in our life, as opposed to saying, why has this happened to me? We should ask a different question. That's, why has this happened for me? And it gives us a very different perspective on the world. And there's not many people out there who actually go and embrace that into their own world and show that actually this sucks, but it's happened for me. It's happened for a purpose.
It's happened for a reason. Yeah.
Happened for a reason. And if I could ask everybody watching and listening to this to go and absorb that and think about what's sucking in my world and why has it happened for me and what can I learn and how can I benefit from it?
Yeah.
Maybe people's lives might be a happier place.
I completely agree. It's all about how you look at things.
That's it. So Nikki, thank you for your time. All the links to your Facebook, Instagram, Motivation Factory, everything in the description below. I'd encourage everybody to reach out to you, and I don't know, maybe they can come and tell you jokes whilst you climb up Kilimanjaro. Who knows what the future can...
I'd love that. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thanks, Nikki.
All right.